Ok, si vede?
Sì.
Sì, perfetto. Okay, good afternoon to everyone. I'm Veronica, and during the next 3 hours, we will talk about the geological record of Earth's climate. We will talk about the geological record of the dynamics, time, and mode of variability, natural variability of Earth's climate. We will take, I think, 5 minutes of break each hour, more or less. And but please feel free to make your questions also during the presentation, not only at the end of the lessons. And I try to check the chat for your questions, maybe during the breaks. And in this first slide, you can see also my email contact here. And please feel free to contact me if you have any questions about Earth's climate dynamics, and if you want more materials, articles, notes, etc. about this subject matter. Just a few words to introduce myself. I'm Veronica Rossi, and I'm a geologist at the Department of Biological, Geological, and Environmental Sciences of the University of Bologna. So I'm not a paleoclimatologist, but I'm very interested in the dynamics, in the time and mode of variability of Earth's climate, because this point is very important for my research, because I'm interested in the responses of the positional environment and ecosystem, especially along the coastline, in the transitional area, to past climate change and past change in relative sea level, as well as human impact. So maybe we can wonder why we should be interested in the reconstruction of Earth's climate history, maybe over a very long time interval. In this case, over, for example, 500 and more millions of years. And if we, in the view, why the study of the past oscillation in climate of our planet can be useful for a better understanding of what is going on now, for a better understanding of global warming. In other words, how we can link or connect, make a relationship between the past oscillation in climate of our planet with, for example, the present day state of health of the ice cap, of the ice sheet in Arctic or Antarctica. In other words, again, how can we use the past as the savior for the future? We try to give an answer to this question, why we should know past climate condition of our planet, maybe very far back in times, during the first part of this presentation. And I'd like to show you the so-called Earth fever line. In other words, I'd like to show you the preliminary results of a very interesting project that involved a lot of scientists. And this project aims to reconstruct the global paleotemperature curve of our planet over a very big time interval, the last more or less 500 millions of years. After that, in the second part of the presentation, I'd like to answer to the questions where and how. In other words, where we should go to search in the geological record nice information about past climate conditions. You know, the geological record is very wide, so we have a lot of geological record, different type of rocks, sediments, ice, and so on. Which of these materials, natural materials, are more useful for past climate reconstruction? And as a consequence, we should know also how we should analyze this past, this geological record to gain a good reconstruction of past climate conditions of our planet. Lastly, during the third part of this presentation, I want to show you another global paleotemperature curve that in this case covers only the last 60 million of years. And I like to make a focus on the very last short time period of our planet that is called quaternary by geologists and begins around 2.5, 2.6 millions of years. Actually, we are living into the quaternary period, okay? And even if this period is quite short in time, because we have always to remember that the age estimation of Earth is about 4.5 billions of years. So the quaternary period is very short and is a very recent period. But it's very interesting for paleoclimate reconstruction because it's full of climate oscillations, natural climate oscillations, the so-called glacial and interglacial period. Well, I think that all this stuff can start with a very famous principle for natural science, the uniformitarianism principle, defined by Charles Lyell and also James Hutton in 19th century. This principle says that the present is the key to the study of the past. So this means that we can assume that the geological processes that act now on our planet are more or less the same that acted in the past, also in the very far past. In other words, we assume that the biological, physical, and chemical laws remain almost unchanged through time. This is a very useful principle because allows us to interpret our geological record, our rocks, in a more easy way. However, we can go beyond this statement, and in a certain sense, we can look on the other side of the coin and think that we can use the geological record as a sort of library, as a sort of natural laboratory full of information about past climate conditions. It's not easy, obviously, to extract this paleoclimate data from the geological record, for example, from rocks, sediments. Sediments means that your grains are not lithified, are unconsolidated deposits, sediments, but also the geological record include ice, the ice accumulation that occur in the ice cap, for example, and so on, and many other types of natural material. So it's not easy to extract from this natural laboratory good, nice, quantitative information about paleoclimate parameters like temperature, for example. But it's very useful because a better knowledge of past paleoclimate conditions can be useful for a better comprehension of natural climate dynamics of our planet. And also can be of help to improve our climate models and projection for the future, near or far future. And this point, this last point, is very important, is an urgent issue, because we know very well, thanks to a lot of instrumental data collected around the globe and for about 2 centuries, something less than 2 centuries. Here you can see the time scale in this graph that reports the trend of global average combined land and ocean global surface temperature. And you can see very well, sorry, okay. You can see very well here, please look to make a mistake with animation, sorry. But you can see here very well that since about the second half of the last century, temperature, global surface temperature increased a lot. You can see clearly a very rapid increasing trend of global temperature. And these are instrumental data. These are tangible data, okay? On the other side, a similar trend, very rapid increase since the second part of the last century, can be observed also if we look to another type of measured data, instrumental data, of global significance. In this case, in this graph, you can see the trend of the increasing trend of mean sea level at a global scale. And again, we can observe that there is a more steep increase in rising sea level at a global scale since about the second part of the last century. Both these trends are called by paleoclimatologists the Great Acceleration. We are living into a period that is characterized by a very great acceleration of both sea level rise and global surface temperature. It's quite alarming, I think. And I want to remind you that these data, that are instrumental data, were collected and integrated and plotted against a time scale, very short time scale, okay, by the IPCC. That means the IPCC is the International Panel on Climate Change, and is a working group of scientists that who are interested in the reconstruction of climate dynamics of our planet. You can find, but I think that probably you know this, you can find at the website of the IPCC a lot of published reports. This graph derived from the summary for policymakers published a few years ago. So this data, this clear rapid increase in global temperature is the reality, okay? But we know very well that the age of the Earth is very big. So we know that we know that the age of our planet is about 4.5, 4.6 billion of years. And the so-called Phanerozoic eon that started around 545 millions of years BPE is the last period, the last eon of our planet, and is very important because at the beginning of the Phanerozoic, we have the explosion of marine life. So this is a very important time interval, but it's very long, and we have to know which kind of climate condition characterize all this interval of time. So we need to expand our record, our paleo temperature, for example, record, back and back in time in the past. To do this, to expand our paleoclimate record, to contextualize better this great acceleration into the long-term modality, changing modality of Earth's climate, we have to look into the geological record and try to extract paleoclimate data. This is the issue of a specific scientific discipline that is named paleoclimatology, obviously. And the paleoclimate research expand our knowledge back into the past, providing several evidences of what? Of the baseline level of natural variability of our planet. So it's very important, this discipline, because it gives us information about the natural variability of Earth's climate, against which we can constrain and plot what we are living now, but also into the geological record. Paleoclimatologists can also extract information about how paleoenvironments and paleobiotic communities responded to past climate change. So all this information about past conditions, okay, can be of help for improving our projection in our models, climate and environmental models for the future. Well, here you can see this so-called Earth fever line. So a very preliminary but also very interesting data curve about the oscillating trend that reconstructs this curve, the oscillating trend of global paleotemperature of our planet over the last more or less 500 millions of years. So cover this curve, this reconstruction cover all the Phanerozoic, the period of oxygen-based life on Earth. This preliminary curve is the first result of a very nice and complex project, research project, led by Scott and Huber, and you can find more information if you are interested on it at this web page. And Scott and Huber asked collaboration to many paleoclimatologists around the world. This is a very teamwork, strong international collaboration, to obtain a lot of paleoclimate data concerning paleotemperature, the paleotemperature parameter across the world and for different time interval in the past, covering all the Phanerozoic eon. And thanks to this first collection and integration of paleoclimate data in terms of paleotemperature, we can see very well from this curve that, first of all, the paleotemperature of our planet varied a lot during the last 500 millions of years, showing a very different scale of oscillation in terms of both frequency or amplitude, but also magnitude of this oscillation in temperature. Here you can see along the vertical axis of this scale the temperature, okay, in Celsius degrees. But apart from the absolute value of this paleotemperature reconstruction, okay, it's very interesting that it's very variable, this paleoclimate parameter, paleotemperature. And also we can observe that the Earth show two main modes of variability for what concern paleotemperature over the last 500 millions of years. The Earth can be in a state of greenhouse world or icehouse world. Simply, during the greenhouse world, the greenhouse condition, global temperature on our planet were very high. And the world is without polar caps, without ice sheet, no Arctic, no Antarctica ice sheet. By contrast, during the ice house period, time, modality, the Earth showed lower global paleotemperatures, and in particular, the world as at polar caps. So a lot of climate fluctuation characterize the paleotemperature history of our planet during the Phanerozoic eon. Variability is the normal frame of our climate system. Obviously, all this variability is forced by natural factors, okay? And the greenhouse world as a whole covers a longer period of time with respect to the ice house state of world over this time interval. Another important point is that we live in an ice house world, okay? Even if also in this curve that we can appreciate a rapid increasing trend, very recent rapid increasing trend in temperature. But we live indeed in an ice house world with ice caps, obviously. Okay. Following Scott and Huber, I want to show you in which point of this curve, this paleotemperature curve, plot some of the main global events of our planet. For example, the so-called Cambrian explosion, that means the moment when the oxygen-based life began and the diversification of marine life started, occurred at the beginning of the Phanerozoic under a greenhouse condition. So very high temperature and no ice sheet. It's quite interesting. Only after, another point very interesting is that only after more about 150 millions of years, polar ice caps formed and persisted for a long time. So this is point 2 on the curve. And another interesting point is that the radiation of 2 big groups of animals on Earth, reptiles and mammals, occurred during 2 different times under greenhouse conditions. And now we are living in an ice world, but ice house world, but with a rapid trend of warming. And we want to know how much this great acceleration in global temperature is due to the emission in the atmosphere of greenhouse gases by human activity. Okay. So I think that we can move now to the second part of our presentation, and we want to talk a little bit in detail about the methodological approach that is commonly followed by paleoclimatologists to obtain good and quantitative paleoclimate reconstruction, for example, the reconstruction of past paleotemperatures. I think that a better understanding of the methodological approach can be of help for you in the way that you can read with a critical thinking any kind of paleoclimate reconstruction. Okay. So the same authors, the same leading authors of this project, Scott and Huber, of the fever line of our planet, say that this reconstruction is a very challenging task, because they need a lot of good paleoclimate data around the world, and so they need to collect a very wide data set of paleoclimate data deriving from different paleoclimate archives that were studied using different paleoclimate indicators or proxies. And we talk about paleoclimate archives and paleoclimate proxies a little bit in this second part of the lesson. But also, the reconstruction of a global paleo-temperature curve covering all the Phanerozoic eon is a very challenging task, also because the data integration is not easy. It's a very complicated processes, and these processes is also very complex because we have to integrate different data into a very robust chronological framework. Okay, we will not talk about this second point. I just want to say to you that fortunately we have a lot of good dating methods that we can apply to different type of archives and proxies. However, this is really a very nice project, but very complex, very challenging task. So, return to the first point, so the analysis of several paleoclimate archives by means of a series paleoclimate proxy. We want to answer to the question where we should search a good paleoclimate archive in the geological record and how we should study it. Okay. We can start, let's start with a definition. What is a paleoclimate archive? Paleoclimate archive is a geological or biological material, obviously natural material, that preserve evidence or clues of past change in climate. This means that we can use a lot of natural material as archives, as a library, containing a lot of information about past climate conditions. For example, we can use rocks, mainly sedimentary rocks, but also sediments, so unconsolidated deposits, corals, reef, tree rings, ice, speleothems, and so on. Maybe one of the most important paleoclimate archives are deep sea deposits, lithified or unconsolidated, okay, doesn't matter, but deep sea deposits. Here you can see in this beautiful photo by Head and Gibbard, published in 2015, a very huge outcropping of deep sea deposits, mainly mud, dated back to about 2-3 million of years. And now forming part, now this secession is part of a mountain, Monte San Nicola, close to the city of Gela in Sicily. Just to give you an idea of the thickness of this outcrop, you can see here, indicated by this arrow and highlighted by this red circle, here you can see a man. So you can now be aware of the thickness, okay, of this outcrop of deep sea deposits. And why deep sea deposits are so good as paleoclimate archives? Mainly for two reasons. The first one is that usually deep sea deposits are continuous in time. This means that if we think about the accumulation of deep sea deposits into a basin, at the sea floor of an ocean basin, we have to imagine a continuous through time accumulation layer by layer of sediments, mainly mud. So we have almost an uninterrupted succession of sediments that can cover a large period of time. Okay. And the second reason why deep sea deposits are so good for paleoclimate analysis is that Usually, deep sea deposits are full of different types of paleoclimate indicators, or paleoclimate proxies is the same meaning. First of all, think about fossils, for example. Usually fossils are very common and very well preserved inside deep sea succession. And in this case, you can also see from this photo a clear structure, stratification inside this thick succession, okay, of marine deposits. And you can imagine that each of these lines corresponds to a bed, a layer that formed time by time, and time by time you have the accumulation of this thick succession of deep sea deposits. So if we are good enough to extract from each of these layers, or maybe better, beds, paleoclimate information using good paleoclimate indicators, and if we can give an age to each of these layer or bed, we can obtain a very long record, a continuous record of paleoclimate conditions for the time period that it was necessary for the accumulation of your deep sea succession. So in other words, we can say, and usually paleoclimatologists say that it's like browse the page of a book, or browse the page of a stack of books. Our study of marine deposits. Layer by layer, we extract paleoclimate information and date this paleoclimate information. And now we can, and so we read in a right way our library, our archive. Well, we can think about the fact that, sorry, I come back to the other slide, the previous slide. Why, maybe many of you may ask why we have these very thick deep sea deposits on land, forming part of Monte San Nicola. Because in this case, this very huge succession of deep sea deposits, after their formation, was brought to light by tectonic forces, the same tectonic forces that formed Monte San Nicola. But we can search and try to get access to deep sea deposits where they are still now forming, so at the ocean floor. And we can do this going offshore in the ocean, Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, doesn't matter, with good vessels and a good teamwork, and a lot of money also, and make cores. So coring, drill the ocean floors, and then recover very long meters and meters of cylinder of sediments that corresponds to the accumulation of layers of deep sea deposits of mud, essentially, at the ocean basin. Here you can see a vessel of the International Ocean Discovery Program, the IODP. That is the last ocean drilling, international ocean drilling project that is still working to collect nice deep sea cores, okay, and to analyze these nice deep sea cores. And here you can see, okay, a fresh core. And here, when you open, if you open this metal tube, you have a cylinder of sediments, okay, that you can take in the lab on the vessel, open in two parts. One part usually is stored into a freezer, and the other half, the other part, is analyzed and sampled for a lot of analysis. Here you can see in this map the location of more or less all the deep sea cores that we have until now. A lot of cores across more or less all the main portion of our, okay. More or less we have more than, we have hundreds of deep sea cores that, and the most part of them have been already studied for paleoclimate studies, but only for paleoclimate studies. Okay. For example, just a curiosity, in the analysis and study of deep sea cores was very useful and is still very useful also to improve the theory of tectonic plates. So these cores, this cylinder of sediments represent very important geological archive, a very important laboratory full of information about Earth history. And now I would like to show you, or better, see with you a few minutes of a video produced by the DP, sorry, because I think that in this video you can appreciate, thanks to some image, the main, most important characteristic of an ocean drilling program. Okay, I hope that we can, we will not have a problem with the audio, but I don't think so. I hope so.
From the early 1960s, when scientists first pierced the ocean floor, ocean drilling started its development as the premier method of conducting scientific investigations into Earth's inner space. Ocean drilling today supports an international community of scientists as they collect deep-sea samples using multiple drilling platforms and technologies to gather global data and historic records about how Earth's systems have carried on through time. Beneath the ocean's surface lie archives, a kind of library that contain vital information about Earth's history. Instead of books, this library has rocks and sediments that document catastrophic events and divulge changes that have affected the planet over millions of years. Scientists rely on these resources to answer questions about climate change, earthquakes, volcanoes, and microscopic creatures that thrive in extreme environments beneath the sea floor. Scientists propose the expeditions that take research vessels out to sea, equipped with drill rigs, laboratories, and cold storage for geological samples retrieved from beneath the ocean's depth. At sea, thousands of meters of drill pipe are lowered to carefully selected drill sites. Drilling crews drill deeply to raise long cores of sediment or rock through drill pipe. The core's layers reveal Earth's past characteristics over time. Scientists confirmed plate tectonics and continental drift, two fundamental Earth processes, using research data amassed through core sample analysis. Environmentally controlled repositories archive cores retrieved throughout decades of ocean drilling operations. Samples are loaned to scientists to support their research and to teachers who share the cores with students excited about Earth science and future Earth investigations.
Okay. Okay. Well, now we know that marine deposits outcropping due to tectonic forces or buried beneath the ocean floor can be a very useful paleoclimate archives. But not only marine deposits are important paleoclimate archives, because, for example, also coral reef can contain a lot of information about past climate conditions, especially past conditions of ocean temperatures. And I not show this in very detail, but you can see here, for example, a coring, a drilling operation across a coral reef. And what we can obtain thanks to coring procedure, again, is a sort of core, but composed by, in this case, by biogenic carbonates. That is the main component of coral reef, okay? Because coral reef is the product, indeed, of the vital, of the metabolism processes of polyp. So you can see here in this photo that also the coral reef are composed by the superposition of layer by layer of bands of calcium carbonate. And again, if we can date each of these bands, and if we can extract paleoclimate information data from each of these bands, we can transform this core into a continuous record of paleoclimate condition occurring during the formation of the coral reef. It's the same philosophies, the same methodological approach that we can use also for the analysis of another paleoclimate archives, fully biological in this case. So the tree rings are of wood, for example, of plants, or certain of specific type of wood. Another very important paleoclimate archive that deserves more words is the ice, in the sense that, especially at the site of polar cap, you have a long-term and continuous accumulation, layer by layer again, of ice. So we can drill the ice cap, Arctic, in Greenland, for example, but especially in the Antarctica, and then obtain a long record, a cylinder of ice, an ice core. And in this photo, you can see the moment of the extraction of an ice core. But if we look in detail to a part of this core, we can see again that we can physically identify the superposition of ice layer and ice layer through time into your core. So again, we can try to date each of these bands composing my ice core and extract from each of these bands paleoclimate information. In particular, we can extract information about the composition, and in particular concentration of greenhouse gases of past atmosphere above Antarctica, but also we can reconstruct the mean temperature of the atmosphere above the ice cap at the moment of the formation of each of these band, layer or layer of ice. Just to give you an overview of how many data paleoclimate archives are available until now, and we will still collect new paleoclimate archives. I show you put this image in our presentation, and you can image that, and that is, it's really real. Each of these symbols corresponds to a paleoclimate archive. In other words, in the ocean, each of these points corresponds to a deep sea core. Each of these points in the area of the Arctic and Antarctica corresponds to ice cores. But also we have a lot of paleoclimate archive distributed on continents. Well, in this slide, I just want to make a sort of summary of the main paleoclimate archives that are commonly used for the reconstruction of very recent past climate conditions. So in these archives, marine sediments, lacustrine sediments also, speleothems and ice cores are the main archives used for the reconstruction of quaternary climate oscillation, the oscillation of the climate over the last 2.5, 2.6 million of years. And we talk about marine sediments and ice core, okay? But also we have to know that in a similar way, we can use the accumulation of lacustrine deposits at the bottom of a lake to obtain past climate data. Also, we're not talking in detail about this, but it's useful to know that we can also use lacustrine deposits as paleoclimate archives. And we can also use speleothems. Speleothems are stalagmites, for example, so are chemical sedimentary rocks that form under peculiar condition of temperature and pressure in caves. Also, speleothems are used to obtain past climate data. For each of these main archives, I make a list of the main, not all, but all the main paleoclimate proxies that can be, or indicators, that can be used to extract from this archive, layer by layer, information, for example, about paleotemperature condition at the time of the deposition of the layer, or paleoprecipitation conditions, or atmospheric, for example, composition in terms of greenhouse gases, for example. And as a whole, the very big family of paleoclimate proxies or indicators can be subdivided into three categories. Because paleoclimate proxies are any physical, chemical, or biological material preserved within our archives that can be analyzed and correlated with specific paleoclimate features, for example, paleotemperatures, okay? And For example, if we look to the proxies that we can analyze within marine sediments, outcropping or cored sediments thanks to deep sea ocean drilling project, it doesn't matter, just marine sediments, okay? We can analyze and obtain through, by means of a lot of calculation and analysis, paleoclimate information based on the chemical composition and or the composition in terms of stable isotopes within each layer of our marine sediments. So this kind of proxies are chemical paleoclimate proxies. But also we can obtain information about paleoclimate conditions looking to the grain size, for example, of each of the layers composing our marine succession. And this is a typical example of physical paleoclimate proxy. But also, and maybe they are the most common one, the most famous one, we can use the fossil content that we can find within each layer composing my marine sediments to obtain paleoclimate data. Fossils include fossils of fauna, but also fossils of flora. So pollen and spores, the macro rest of vegetal remains, but also, for example, mollusks, shells of mollusks. Malacofauna means mollusks, essentially. So gastropods, bivalves, and etc. But also we can collect and analyze layer by layer the fossil content in terms of microfossils. So in this case, we have to use a microscope. Okay. Altogether, these proxies, so we need a multidisciplinary approach and we need a teamwork. Altogether, these proxies can give us a lot of information about past climate condition during which our marine sediments formed. However, we can also distinguish paleoclimate proxy if they are direct or indirect. What does it mean? Well, it means that there are some very nice paleoclimate indicator or proxy that can give you directly a direct information in terms of paleoclimate parameters. There are other paleoclimate proxies, the most part of paleoclimate proxies, that need to be calibrated, so require more work, okay, to extract information in terms of, for example, paleotemperatures. An example of direct paleoclimate proxy are the air bubbles entrapped in the layers of the ice caps. Here indicated as gas concentration in correspondence of the ice cores, obviously, in terms of archives. What does it mean? This means that, and it's very amazing, it's quite incredible, but it's real. Inside the ice cap, and so inside our ice core, okay, we can see a lot of air bubbles that remain entrapped within the layers, the ice layers during their formation. So these bubbles corresponds to a direct sample of the atmosphere above the ice cap at the time of the formation of the layer, where we found the air bubbles. So it's quite incredible. So we can analyze the composition of past atmospheres using the air bubble enclosed within the ice at the polar site. Just 5 minutes more, then for you it's okay, and we will have a break. Okay. Here you can see skin. Okay, very simple. Simplify the skin of a drilling site in the Antarctica. Okay, and the analysis of a very long ice core, the analysis of several long ice cores drilled in Antarctica, and in particular the analysis of the content of the air bubbles enclosed within each ice layer composing your ice core, give us the opportunity to reconstruct the concentration of the variability in concentration over the last 400,000 of years of carbon dioxide, CO2, in the atmosphere above the Antarctica. So here you can see how much this value, the concentration of a greenhouse gas is so important, like carbon dioxide, naturally varied through time over the last 400,000 years. This data derived from the analysis of ice cores from a site named Vostok in Antarctica. But also, we can extend this record of concentration of carbon dioxide back in time up to 650,000 of years, thanks to another drilling project called EPICA. And what is really interesting and a little bit alarming is that if we plot against this value of CO2 reconstructed thanks to the air bubbles enclosed within the ice sheet, and if we plot against this reconstruction the present day level concentration of carbon dioxide, we can clearly see that the present day concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the highest measured over the last 650,000 of years. Okay. These last 2 minutes before the break, during these last 2 minutes, we can see together a very brief interview of released by a glaciologist.
My name's Nerily Abram. I'm an ice core scientist and I work with the British Antarctic Survey. And the reason that I work on ice cores is that they're an amazing way of going back and looking at what the Earth's climate was like in the past. And that gives us information on how the Earth's climate is changing now and how it might change in the future. When you get to a field site in Antarctica, there's nothing there. people who go to Antarctica and do these sorts of jobs are scientists, but once you get into the field, you're pretty much everything. So you need to build your camp, you become a carpenter, you become an electrical engineer, you're a cook. You have to be able to be very self-sufficient to make the project a success. The drill works on a winch. So when we lower the drill down, we drill about 1.5 meters of ice, and then we bring that to the surface, and we lower the drill back down again and drill the next 1.5 meters of ice. And we keep on repeating that process over and over again until we reach the bottom of the ice sheet. When we drill down through the ice sheet, we're drilling further and further back in time. We drilled an ice core that was 364 metres long, and the ice that we recovered from the bottom of that ice core is over 20,000 years old. This is a part of Antarctica where climate is changing really quickly at the moment, and the temperature has warmed by over 2 degrees in the last 50 years. We're seeing glaciers flowing faster than they have in the past, ice shelves are collapsing. When we cut open the ice, we can see these bubbles of ancient atmosphere that have been trapped inside the ice ever since it formed over Antarctica. And we can actually measure the composition of that ancient atmosphere, and it's through measuring the greenhouse gases from the bubbles in ice cores that we get this clearest link between what the temperature of the Earth has been like in the past and the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And that allows us to have a better understanding of how the climate is changing now and how it might continue to change in the future.
Okay. I think that we can have a break. I was born at at the moment. Okay. 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 I think that we can have a break now. 5 minutes. Grazie. Grazie a voi. Ok, possiamo riprendere. I think that we can restart our presentation. Ok. Suono, condividi. Ok. Perfetto. Okay. So just a few words about the ice cores and the use of gas concentration within air bubbles entrapped in the ice. Well, now it's going on a new project on the new coring project in the Antarctica, named Beyond Epica. This project, where is also involved an Italian team, wants to retrieve the continuous ice core back to the bedrock of the Antarctica continent. And indeed, they want to cover the climate history of the last 1.5 million of years. So they want to go back more in time with respect to Vostok project and Epica project that stopped around 650,000 of years as ice core record and CO2 concentration record. So we want to go back more in time, down to 1.5 million of years. Okay, here, but I think that we have not enough time now, but if you want, you can look these videos explaining the aims of the project Beyond Epica. now we can take a brief look to another type of indirect paleoclimate proxies that can be used for examples or again within the archives, the ice cores archives, the stable isotopes. In which way stable isotopes can be used to reconstruct past climate conditions? In which way the values, the amount of stable isotope within each layer of our ice core can furnish us good paleoclimate data of the past, paleoclimate data. First of all, just remember you what is an isotope. Isotope is each of two or more forms of an element that contain a different number of neutrons. This means that isotopes of the same chemical element, oxygen, for example, hydrogen, for example, each isotope has different a different physical behavior, because you can have an heavier isotope and a lighter isotope. The heavier isotope has a higher number of neutrons. The lighter isotope of the same element, for example, oxygen, has a lower number of neutrons, so has a lower number of mass. And which kind of unstable isotopes we can use in the ice core? Well, thinking about the composition of the ice, we can use stable isotope of the oxygen and hydrogen stable isotope. D in this case means deuterium, that is one of the hydrogen stable isotopes. But we will talk a little bit more in detail about the oxygen stable isotopes in the view of paleoclimate reconstruction from ice cores. This value is a delta value, as is explained by this symbol, okay? And derived from this formula that is not so complicated as it looks like at the first sight, okay? In fact, what we need to do to obtain this delta value, that is the value very informative for paleoclimate reconstruction, what we have to do is to measure layer by layer the ratio between the heavier oxygen isotope, oxygen 18, and the lighter oxygen isotope, oxygen 16. This is the mass number, okay? This means sample. So you take you collect a sample from each ice layer and measure this ratio between two stable oxygen isotopes. This value then is compared in a certain sense with the standard. That is the value of the same oxygen ratio, but within the standard of reference, that is the mean ocean water. So you know this value, okay? It's a sort of constant, is not variable, okay? After that, you obtain a number that you have to multiply for thousands because it's too small. And all this operation, all this calculation give you this number, this value that is the delta oxygen value. and delta oxygen and variation through ice core, through ice layers of this delta value can give you information, or better, can be transformed into paleotemperatures value of the atmosphere above the ice cap at the time of the formation of each ice layer, time by time. This is not a very easy calculation, but this is possible, okay, with errors, with approximation, but we can transform, so calibrate delta oxygen value into paleotemperature value of the atmosphere. In general, very simply, when delta is positive, the sample, my ice layer, is enriched in the heavier isotope, or oxygen 18 in this case. The opposite when delta is negative. So I have already highlighted this point. And then I can show you, please look just to this part of the graph, the green curve, okay? You can see the reconstruction of past temperature in Celsius degrees of the atmosphere above the Antarctica ice cap over the last 800,000 of years. Each of these values of paleotemperatures derive from the calibration of delta oxygen value from each layer of my ice cores. And then you can see that also the paleotemperature change a lot of the maximum delta, the maximum variation over the last 800,000 years is about 5 Celsius degrees. That is a lot. Okay. In this graph, you can see the same thing, more or less, the same results, but in this case, along the vertical axis, you can, the temperature, the value, the paleotemperature reconstruction, were considered with respect the base level corresponding to the present day temperature of the atmosphere above Antarctica ice cap, okay? So you can see that we, during the last 800,000 years, we have a lot of oscillation, yes, but we have just 1, 2, 3, 4 periods of time showing estimated paleotemperatures of the atmosphere above Antarctica higher than that occurring at present day. Okay, so this is also an interesting data. Okay, so there were at least 4 periods of time in the last more or less 400,000 years that were characterized by higher temperature of the atmosphere above Antarctica. What is very interesting also for what concerns oxygen isotope value or delta oxygen values is that we can use the same methodology on another type of material. Not ice, but calcium carbonate composing the shells of marine organisms. Because we have, obviously, the oxygen, so we can calculate from the calcite shells the ratio between the heavier and the lighter isotope of oxygen. In particular, we paleoclimatologists use foraminiferous shells. what is a foraminifera? Foraminifera is a microscopic, is a protist organism, is a microscopic marine organism that secrete its shell, its calcite, calcium carbonate shell. The dimension of these shells of the organism, so until they are alive, is microscopic, is in the range of the sense granules, the sense grains. So from 1 millimeter down to 63 microns. So very, very small size shells. And the key strength of these foraminifera are that they are small size and ubiquitous. Why these features make this organism so important? Because we can find a lot, because they are small size, a lot of foraminifera shells encased as fossils, as microfossils, within each layer of our marine succession. And they are ubiquitous, so we can find them in every type of oceans. So we are sure, more or less, we are sure that we can find always foraminifera within our deep sea succession. Cored deep sea succession or outcropping deep sea succession. This means that we can apply the analysis of the delta oxygen to our marine succession. And this is key, this is strategic, because when foraminifera calcifies, so form their shells, taking elements, calcium, carbon, oxygen from the surrounding ocean water, they encase and store in the chemistry of their shells a lot of environmental information about that ocean, that water, including temperature. So we can use delta oxygen isotope from foraminifera shells to reconstruct paleotemperature of the oceans. Here, a photo, not so nice, but a photo of a series of deep sea core succession. And we should imagine that we have to collect very closely spaced samples along all these cores, okay? For each of these samples, we have to pick a high number, usually, of shells of foraminifera in order to reach a sufficient amount of calcium carbonate to obtain valid delta oxygen values. And then we can transform delta oxygen values in paleotemperatures of the ocean at the time of the formation of that layer containing that fossil assemblage. And then we can, but also we can, as always, transform this depth, the depth of the samples into time. And so we obtain, please look in this case to the green one curve, we can obtain a nice quantitative reconstruction of the temperature of the ocean where we drilled our, for example, cores, marine cores, for the last, in this case, 400,000 of years. And we can see very well, again, that as well as the temperature of the atmosphere above the ice sheet, during the same time interval, also the temperature of the ocean varied a lot, okay? However, we have to keep in mind that the delta oxygen value that we can extract using, for example, mass spectrometer from the shells of foraminifera depends not only by the temperature of the ocean masses where that foraminifera lived, but also depends to the delta oxygen value, so the oxygen, the stable oxygen composition of the same seawater. But this fact make a little bit complex our interpretation of delta oxygen for foraminifera. But not so, indeed it's not so complicated, because this factor, delta oxygen, the delta oxygen of the seawater, fast seawater, okay, where the shells where foraminifera lived, okay, at a specific period of time, depends to the ice sheet dynamics, or the ice volume as a total at the global scale. This means that these two factors, main factors that influence the value of delta oxygen in the shells of foraminifera, work in the same directions. This means that when we look to foraminifera that lived during the colder period, we have an increase of delta oxygen value in their shells. But the same consequence is due to a more ice volume. So, in other words, when we are in a glacial period, so cold, lower temperature of the ocean masses, and more ice at the ice sheet, okay, at the polar side, we have an increase in delta oxygen value in the shells of foraminifera. We have the opposite when we are in an interglacial period, so higher temperature and less ice, or ice melting. In this slide, because I think that this concept is a little bit complex and we don't have enough time to go in more detail, but and it's not the aim of these lessons, obviously, but in this slide you can find, I hope, the take-home message about the use of delta oxygen value from foraminifera shells as paleothermometer. Because delta oxygen records from the shells of foraminifera provide a quantitative measure of the combined effects of change in ice volume and or ice sheet dynamics and in the temperate ocean water. So if the value of the delta is high, we are looking to a sample to a layer of sediments, of deep sea sediments, formed during a glacial period, probably. More ice and lower temperature. The opposite if we have a sample showing a low delta oxygen value. Just a few words about, to complete this part, about a very important curve that is not really curve, but is a stack record. Published some years ago by Lisiecki and Raimo, two scientists that collect and integrate against a time scale a lot of delta oxygen records obtained from foraminifera shells sampled along chord succession, deep sea chords. They collect more than 50 globally distributed benthic foraminifera delta oxygen records, And then each of these points corresponds to a delta record, so a core, a deep sea core analyzed in terms of delta oxygen value from benthic foraminiferous shells. And they obtain a continuous record of this value, delta oxygen, for the last 5 million years. Here I plot, but it's not important, the name of this time interval, but I plot an international chronostratigraphic chart that is just the calendar, we can say, the calendar of the Earth evolution. Okay? All you can find here, Quaternary period. And what they obtain from this collection and integration of delta oxygen value around, okay, the oceans. Okay? They clearly document that here you can see the beginning of the Quaternary period, okay, from about 2.5, 2.6 million of years. They say, they document that since the last 3.5 million of years, we have a general trend toward an increase of delta oxygen values from benthic foraminifera encased within our deep sea cores. This means that since about 3.5 million of years, we have a slow decreasing trend of temperature of the ocean. But superimposed on this general trend of cooling since about 3.5 million years, we have clearly identified by this oscillating value of delta oxygen the presence of high-frequency climate cycles. So the so-called glacial interglacial periods that characterize, as we said at the beginning of the presentation, the Quaternary period in particular. Each of these cycles are numbered in this graph, and you can see that when we use odd numbers, we are in interglacial period. For example, the interglacial number 1, that is where we are living now, okay, is an interglacial period because we have relatively low delta oxygen value. Okay, when by contrast, hidden numbers, for example 2, corresponds to glacial periods, and in fact we have a higher value of delta oxygen from foraminiferous shells. But the Quaternary period that starts around 2.5, 2.6 million of years is full of oscillations, like the most recent one, from the glacial period number 2 to the interglacial period, the present day period number 1. Okay, and we can, thanks to this delta oxygen value, we can say that up to around 700,000 of years, the periodicity of this oscillation or alternation of glacial and interglacial period occurred at the time scale of 41,000 years. After about 700,000 years in this green band, okay, on the figure, we have a different interval of a different time periodicity of alternation of glacial and interglacial period, glacial and interglacial period, glacial, interglacial, glacial, interglacial, so on. The periodicity of this alternation is in for the most recent part of the Quaternary period, about 100,000 of years. So now we are leading you into a world characterized by the alternation of interglacial and glacial period following a periodicity of about 100,000 years. Okay, very few words about fossils that are another type of indirect paleoclimate indicators. For example, we can think about the fact that if this alternation of glacial and interglacial period during, for example, the Quaternary period is real, and we have a lot of paleoclimate proxies that confirm this natural modality of alternation in glacial and interglacial condition of our planet for the last 2.5 million years. This change temperature of the ocean, for example, must have impacted on the community, biological community that lived in the past oceans, but also in the past Mediterranean Sea. So this means that we can use fossils of these paleo communities enclosed within marine sediments to extract information from a paleoclimatological point of view. What does it mean? I just want to give you an example, quite famous, I think, for the Mediterranean Sea, cold and warm species. For example, look to these two mollusks. This is a gastropod. Its name is Persististrombus bubonius, but it doesn't matter the name. What matters is that these gastropods now, at present, they live offshore the coastline of Central Africa, Atlantic Central Africa, especially particularly offshore the coastline of Senegal. This other mollusk, that is a bivalve, and its name is Arctica islandica, now, present-day distribution, thrive the ocean water of the North Atlantic. So this is a warm species, Persistrombus bubonius, and the Arctica islandica is cold species, okay? But during specific, peculiar time during the Quaternary period, we can find this species in the marine sediments of the Mediterranean. And the fact that the occurrence of this species clearly documents the fact that, for example, in this time interval, around 110,000 of years BP, the Mediterranean Sea was warmer than today. Probably the water of the Mediterranean Sea during that time was characterized by temperature similar to that characterizing now this part of the Central Atlantic. But it's not surprising that we found Persististrombus latus or bubonius, depending on the nomenclature, in marine sediments of the Mediterranean basin dated to this time interval. Because if we come back to this curve, we can see very well that during about 100,000 years BP, we are in an interglacial period, numbered 5, okay? And this period probably, that is also called the last interglacial period, was characterized by temperatures higher of the present day interglacial. So warm species can colonize the Mediterranean basin. By contrast, but following the same idea, okay, we are not surprised now if someone tells us that we can find in marine sediments of the Mediterranean Sea, dated around 20,000 years BP, a cold species like Arctica islandica. Because during that time, we are here. We are in the last glacial maximum period, okay? So it's not surprising that cold species can move from the North Atlantic area waters and colonize the Mediterranean Sea. However, we don't have to forget that we can use not only fauna, fossil of fauna, to obtain nice information about past climate conditions, for example, of the Mediterranean basin. But we have also to remember that we can use vegetation remains and pollens, okay? That is the other part of the big group of fossils, flora fossils. We can use, and paleoclimatologists use fossils of past vegetation covers in terms of seeds, for example. You can see here some nice specimens of fossil seeds found within marine deposits, for example. But in particular are very useful pollen that are pollen is very small size, tends to a maximum 100 microns of dimension. Pollen are small size structure of a plant, and is composed by a material, sporopollenin, I think in English it's in the name, sporopollenina in Italian, that is very resistant, so can fossilize very well. And we can have pollen grains within sediments very, very old. Millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years, okay? And just two slides, 2 words to, I hope, better explain you how we can use fossil assemblage of pollen stored within deposits to track, for example, the alternation of glacial and interglacial periods during the Quaternary. Well, think about this. First of all, specialists of pollen analysis can reconstruct from pollens the paleovegetation cover at the period of the formation of the sediment layers where you extracted your pollen assemblage. Okay, so from pollens, they can obtain a picture of the vegetation cover on land, obviously. Okay. If we look to very simply, in this 2 slides, probably because I'm not a botanic, I made a lot of approximation. But if we think about at the present day, how different, how the vegetation cover, for example, characterizing our latitudes, a lot of trees, essentially, okay, mainly oak, mixed oak, so a typical Mediterranean forest, but it doesn't matter. A lot of trees, okay. And at the same time, at present, if we go at high latitudes, we have a lot of herbs and very few trees or no trees, at least shrub. This is typical steppe herbs of tundra area. Well, this is what is now, okay? But if we found inside our sample collected from two different layers of our, for example, deposits, marine deposits, if in one sample we found pollen assemblage that indicate a very a high cover of trees at the moment of the formation of that layer, sediment layer, we know, we can assume that we are looking to a layer of sediments formed under interglacial conditions. But if we move up into the core and we collect another sample, and we found in that sample pollen assemblage, and if we find in that sample pollen assemblage that corresponds to a steppe tundra-like vegetation cover, we can assume that we are looking to a layer, sediment layer, formed under glacial condition. This is just the application of uniformitarianism principle, okay, at the end. Okay, I think that we can wait for the break, okay? We can talk about a little bit also of the third and last part of our presentation. This is shorter than the previous one, okay? Okay, after that, I hope that for you, after this part of the lesson, I hope that it's also for you more easy to look to paleoclimate reconstruction, even if we are not specialists, okay? And I think that it's quite evident that we need to work in a teamwork. We need a lot of specialists to obtain good, to extract good paleoclimate data from various types of paleoclimate archive. And now I just want to discuss with you the last portion of the last part, the more recent part of this paleotemperature global curve, okay, by Scott and up. In particular, to move this. Okay, I just want to show you this graph by Burke and colleague, published a few years ago. And these authors try to put together and integrate all the paleotemperature global data for the last 60 millions of years. And they use essentially delta oxygen value from Epica ice core, from deep sea cores, from N-Grip is the name of an ice core from Greenland, but essentially they use that oxygen value. This is why I'm sure I discussed so long about this proxy. And they plot against this time scale the delta, the deviation of the paleo temperature reconstructed for all this long time period with respect to the temperature at the middle of the last century. That becomes the reference level, the base level, okay? The reference temperature value. And so we have a lot of oscillation of global paleo temperature above and below the reference value of global temperature at 1950 AD. So it's not surprising that we have around 50 million years BP, the so-called thermal maximum, so very high temperature, and at least 10-15 degrees more with respect to the global temperature measured in 1950 AD. Why I say it's not surprising? Because if we come back to the fever line, we can see very well that we are at around 50 million years BP, still into a greenhouse world, after we fall into an ice house world. After that, after this thermal maximum, we have a long-term decrease in global paleo temperature, okay, as a general trend. What is quite interesting is that for the last 10,000 of years, okay, more or less, we have a sort of stabilization of temperature until 1950 AD. This period of time is named by geologists Holocene. Okay. What is also very visible from this curve, from this reconstruction, is that during the last 40, more or less 100,000 years, we have a lot of oscillations, okay? But we know this now. This represents, okay, interglacial and glacial alternation, typical of the whole Quaternary period. But during the last 700,000 years, this oscillation follow a periodicity of about 100,000 years. Okay. Around 130,000 years, we have a peak in temperature. We are in the last interglacial, when warm species like Persistis thrombus, Latus, or Bubonius colonized the Mediterranean Sea, because the temperature in the Mediterranean Sea, as the global temperature, were higher. After that, we fall into the last glacial maximum, so into a quite long period, tens of thousands of years of very cold, low temperature, so very cold conditions. Okay. The last glacial period, the last glacial maximum period started around 20 thousands of years BP and ended around 15,000 years BP. After that, we have an increase in temperature at the beginning of the present interglacial. And since about 10,000 years BP, we are in a more or less stable, relatively high temperature conditions that are anyway very low with respect to those occurring in this time interval, okay, before the quaternary period and obviously during the thermal maximum. Just look to what should, how should appear the globe during the last glacial maximum period, about 20,000 of years BP. Ice sheet grow a lot. The most part of North America was covered, and also Scandinavia, part of Asia, where north part of Asia were covered by ice sheets. Okay. And what is quite interesting to know is that in the Mediterranean Sea, we have the colonization. We experienced the colonization of cold species from the Arctic area, like Arctica Icelandica, but also the global sea level, and so also in the Mediterranean Sea, fall down. And we experienced a fall down of the global sea level of about less than 120 meters with respect to the present day sea level. Indeed, in this image, we try to represent the hypothetical coastline of the Mediterranean area during the last glacial maximum. Just for curiosity, in the North Adriatic, this is the North Adriatic, okay? All this part in gray was not submerged by the sea, but was exposed and was, in a general view, an alluvial plain. And the Po Delta that now is located here was located here because of the fall of the sea level during the last glacial maximum. Why during glacial period we have a fall of sea level, global sea level? Because a big part of precipitation remain entrapped as ice in the ice sheet, and so the global sea level fall. Okay, before the last break, I just want to put your attention on the last 10,000 of years, where that seems to be quite stable until the great acceleration that we know is the reality since about the half of the last century. Okay, before this great acceleration, more or less paleo-temperature, yes, oscillating, but not so much. Okay, so seems to be quite stable this time of period in terms of paleo-temperatures. But if we look with more detail into the ice core record, in this case of the Greenland ice core record, or if we look in great details using all delta oxygen value, we can see that also within the last 10,000 of years, so-called Holocene period, okay, we can find small amplitude, but very frequent oscillations, climate oscillations. So this means that also within the Holocene period, we have climate change, but less intense with respect the alternation of glacial and interglacial periods. Okay, I think that we can have now break of 5 minutes, and then after the break, I think that we will conclude. We have a few slides more for this presentation. Oh, sorry. No, so why almost every 2030 is there a peak? Okay, yes, Marco. Okay, there is a good correlation between the peak, the maximum, the high concentration value of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and paleo-temperature, high paleo-temperature reconstructed from ice core and from deep sea cores. This is these are two sides of the same coins, no? Because if you have more greenhouses concentration in the atmosphere, you have higher temperature at a global scale, in the atmosphere, in the oceans, on land, okay. But all these oscillations that we have seen by now are due to natural forcing factors. And the last slides of this presentation, I present you as a sort of list, okay? Because this is also another subject matter. The main possible forcing factors that ruled these climatic oscillations. I don't know if I answer to your question, Marco. This is me, Silvia. What is the relationship between the reliability of tire repository and instrumental data? Nice, very nice question, Silvia. It's very complicated. It's very complicated to integrate and correlate paleoclimate data obtained using different type of proxies, and it's even more complicated. Correlate paleoclimate, Marco, paleoclimate data with instrumental data. This is a key point of our of paleoclimatological studies. We are trying. The paleocolor scientists working with the paleoclimate proxies are trying to analyze in a very deep detail, also in terms of time, the most recent oscillation of the climate. This is why the Holocene period is an hotspot for paleoclimate reconstruction, because during the last 10,000 years, 11,000 years, we have the opportunity to apply dating technique like radiocarbon, for example, okay, that can give you a very high resolution chronological framework. So high to be more reliable, comparable to the time resolution of the instrumental data. It's a matter, first of all, I think that it's a matter of time resolution. A realistic and good, robust comparison between instrumental data and paleoclimate data. So it's a work in progress, this part. Because of what global temperature increase before the stability? So what global temperature increase before the stability? Yes, Mattia. The reason of the stability probably is due to one of the main forcing factor on the natural variability of Earth climate system. That is astronomical forcing, so-called Milankovitch forcing factors. We will talk a little bit of it at the end of the presentation, the lessons. However, as we have seen during before the break, even the Holocene period is not so stable. Indeed, actually, it's not so stable. Simply, the oscillations are less intense in terms of magnitude. And we will see that also during the last 2000s of years, so the historical period, we have climate change. Think about, for example, the Little Ice Age. Sorry, maybe I used the break to answer to the question, so maybe we can wait 2 minutes more before starting. Mhm. Okay, I think we can start our presentation. Few slides left. So, okay, only this one. Okay. So, just a sort of alert. I put this slide to remember you that even if the Holocene period seems to be stable, it is not stable and is full of high frequency, millennial scale, low amplitude climate oscillations. I mean that, for example, the most intense climate events of the Holocene period that is dated around 8.2 kiloyears BP seems to be characterized by by temperatures lower than 1, maybe 2 Celsius degrees with respect to the present day. Just to give you an idea of the temperature oscillation that seems to be associated to this high frequency, small amplitude climate events of the Holocene period. Here you can see how it's complicated, even more complicated to analyze and reconstruct the main characteristics of climate events of small amplitude occurring during the Holocene period. Because if at the scale of interglacial and glacial period oscillation, we know that during the glacial period we have low temperature and lower sea levels at a global scale, more or less. During this small scale climate oscillation during the Holocene period, various paleoclimate archives, various paleoclimate proxies show that the way we have this kind of climate change differ site from site. For example, in this map, we can see that until now, for what we know about the 8.2 kiloyear events, we know that this event of climate change corresponds to lower temperature for all these sites highlighted by blue dots. But in one site, we have a climate change dated around 8.2 kiloyears BP. But this climate change indicate warmer conditions. And if we look, because we can also do this, if we obtain paleoclimate information for the Holocene period, and in particular for the time period around this climate event, In terms of paleo precipitation, we can do this using the good paleoclimate proxies. Well, we see that in some sites we have, during this climate change, wetter condition. In other sites, we have drier condition. So the Holocene climate change, climate oscillation, or climate events, doesn't matter in this case how we define them, even if they are so small in terms of amplitude, they are very variable. We don't know indeed how the climate change during the occurrence of this small scale climate oscillation of the Holocene period. So, and by the end, less expected change are probably more damaging, potential damaging, because we don't know how this kind of Holocene small-scale climate oscillation could be also in the future. If we look to the ice core, in this case Greenland ice core, thanks again to delta oxygen value, if we look in very deep detail, high detail for the last 2,000 years, okay, we can recognize a lot again of small scale, small amplitude climate oscillations, the so-called Roman World Period, medieval world period, the Little Ice Age, and now paleoclimatologists say that this kind of oscillation again are very complicated, okay, are very complex, that we are quite far to obtain a good, firm, robust knowledge about the dynamics of this small scale, small amplitude climate change. What concerns its ice age, maybe is the most famous one because it's quite recent. It occurs around between 17th century and the first half of the 19th century. In this picture, you can see the sort of photo of the lagoon of Venice completely iced at the surface due to the very low, quite low temperature. Okay, last slide, just to give you very spot information about the possible forcing factors of such complicated but intense natural climate variability of our planet. Mainly, we have three types of possible forcing factors, okay, that can induce a change in the climate system and then induce persistent change on a long-term scale, induce what we call climate events, climate change, alternation of glacial and interglacial period, and so on. Okay. One causes could be change in plate tectonics. In which way? For example, high volcanic activity can release in a relatively short time interval high amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and then induce a lot of potential climate change. Okay. But also is important to keep in mind that also change in the sun strap, in the amount of heat from the sun to us, can produce change in climate system, can induce such nicely variable value at the global scale of, for example, paleotemperature, okay? But also, another important potential forcing factor of climate change is change in Earth's orbit or change in Earth's astronomical parameter. This kind of forcing factor seems to be particularly important for the Quaternary period. These forcing factors, the astronomical forcing of Quaternary climate oscillation, is the product, okay, of a famous theory developed by Milankovitch. Milankovitch was an astrophysics and a mathematician that developed an astronomical theory, more or less in the first half of the last century, explaining that the long-term paleoclimate change, glacial versus interglacial periods of the Quaternary interval, are probably that this kind of alternation quite well documented. We saw this for the Quaternary interval. For Milankovitch, this alternation, glacial and interglacial, are mainly due to change in the geometry between the relationship, geometrical relationship between Earth, our source of heat, and Sun, our source of heat, and the Earth. In particular, the change in time of three main astronomical parameters, eccentricity, obliquity, and precession, should be, probably are, the main forcing factor of the alternation of glacial and interglacial period. I don't know what, we don't have time, and maybe it's too much specific topic, this one, but if you want to know more about Milankovitch theory, okay, you can contact me and can provide you more materials, but also I think that there is a nice sort of tutorial about Milankovitch theory at this site. Okay. Finally, we should talk also about the consequence of this climate change on what? On the atmosphere, the ice sheet, on the vegetation cover, on the ocean, on the land surface, on the biota in a general way. So we should also think about, but this is another story, on the consequences of this climate change on our planet, on our environments, on our ecosystem, and so on our society also now. Just to give you the last information, the curve composed by Bark and colleague a few years ago also put at the end of this graph the projection of increase in global temperature furnished by the IPCC report from here more or less to 2200. And it's quite interesting to see that the worst case of projection for future trend the next century possibly indicate a global temperature similar to those characterizing the thermal maximum of about 50 millions of years maybe, but this is just projections, okay? And how will environments and ecosystem will react to this future change? This is another story, and we can find interesting data about this possible response of environment and ecosystem and biota to climate change into the geological record. that represent the unique tangible record of expected future coastal scenarios. But this is another subject matter. So thank you very much. Okay, we have 50 minutes for questions, more or less. Sorry, maybe the presentation was quite long. I'm sorry, the webcam is located in the screen of the PC. What anthropogenic elements between the coast have? Yes, I make a list of, Rademan and colleague made a list of the potential natural forcing factor on climate change. Obviously, since about possibly the beginning of the industrial period, the emission in the atmosphere of carbon dioxide and premise have contributed to this great acceleration in temperature. It's very likely the contribution of emission by human activity of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for the very recent increase in temperature. This increase in temperature, the so-called great acceleration, is very alarming in the view that it's occurring in a very short period of time. So this seems that the main matter, the main point, more than the amount of the gases released into the atmosphere, is the rapidity, in the very low time interval during which we are modifying the composition of the atmosphere for what concerns greenhouse gases. I can show you maybe this one. The note. Okay. Here, this graph derived from the technical report, the summary report of policymakers by IPCC, published a few years ago, and we can see quite well the increase since the 1950 AD, and it was in concentration of CO2, but also other greenhouse gases. Okay, and we can see also at the same time, a steep increase in the emission of CO2 in the atmosphere by human activity. So it's very likely that there is a contribution of human activity in this increase in greenhouse gases concentration in the atmosphere. We should understand better how much is the impact of the anthropogenic activity, and how much is the results, this great acceleration is the result of natural climate variability. But this is a very important task, but it's very difficult. We need more data, we need more probably more techniques to discern the two signals, natural and anthropogenic, in the great acceleration. Rapid rate can be really estimated with proxy data, namely the current acceleration period. Absolutely, this is the point. In fact, time is always matter, especially in geological studies. We need to improve our capacity of resolve the geological record in terms of time. And then in fact, one of the hot topic of paleoclimate studies, but in general, quaternary studies, is to obtain very high resolution paleoclimate data. This means that we have to improve our capability to date sediments, essentially, date geological stuff. However, for what concerns high-score record, we have really good, I'm not a glaciologist, but we have very good chronology. And the fact that at the present day, the current level of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is higher of all the estimated value of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere above Antarctica during the last 650,000 years. I think that is a good indicator of the fact that we are changing something. How much, and how much with respect to the natural forces, it's an open question, I think. Why Radiman didn't put them in this scheme about climate? You mean, Mattia, human impact? I suppose. Because if you intend human impact, because the Radiman scheme looked to the natural, to understand the time and mode of natural climate variability. For example, in the Radiman scheme, you cannot see other possible forcing factors. Now oscillations or volcanoes activity at small time scales, because it's a general, it's a general overview of the main forcing factors on climate oscillations, natural climate oscillations. How do scientists answer to the possible? We are just eating. It was so. What could humans do? Yes, we are in an interglacial period. This is true. But it is true also that we are into a period of very high CO2 concentration in the atmosphere with respect to thousands and thousands of years back. It's also true, I think, that if we look to the time scale, so if we look to the rate of increase of temperature of the last, since the middle of the last century, well, we are living really in a world of great acceleration. That seems because we should increase our capability in terms of temporal resolution of proxy data. This great acceleration, this rates of increase of temperature and also sea level seems to have no similar, seems to be an exception. I don't know if that is correct in English. During a big part of the Quaternary period, good part of the Quaternary period. And also, it's quite nice, this good correlation between the amount of the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere and increase in human related CO2 production. But all these questions are good, very, very specific, because this is the point. We need to better compare and then really integrate proxy data, paleoclimate data, and instrumental data. This is the point. And our capability to resolve geological record in terms of time is crucial. Thank you too for the attention and for patience to follow me in this long journey to the Earth's climate variability. Don't know if you have any questions. Also, the following list. Okay. Please contact me. You have my email address. And I hope to be able to answer to your questions. But really, this is a very fascinating subject matter, but we are far to reach a fuller understanding of climate variability. Grazie a voi. There are some must read work paper that you should suggest this topic. Or yes, maybe I can select some papers about this topic. One for major issue, discuss it together during these 3 hours, and I can upload them in the virtual space, the website, the site of virtual. Surely I can do this. Maybe let me 2 days of time to do this. Okay. Because, okay, thank you. Because I think that some of the papers to which I referred during the presentation are very complicated, and I think that I can select some of them useful for you. I think that consider anthropogenic Quaternary is essential to explain the reason of the last century. I don't understand why they consider the human as part of the nature. Yes, if you have any link for it, suggest it's better to use the chat on Teams. Okay. Okay. Okay, in your opinion, is global warming something good for humankind in Ice Age? This is a very complicated, complex question. I think that the consequences of this rapid global warming, this is the matter, the acceleration, the velocity, the rates of this change, the consequences seems to be not nice for our oceans, for the biological communities, think about, for example, I'm a geologist, so I think firstly to this matter, to this problem. Global warming means ice melting. Ice melting means rise in sea level, global sea level. Very high rates of relative sea level rise, as IPCC report explain and document, are very dangerous for our society because a lot of coastal area will be flooded. We will lose a lot of territory, and the coastal area, the coastal plain, delta plains are very precious areas because they are full of ecosystems, so are very important as biological hotspots. Okay, but also they commonly host a lot of cities, a lot of human activities, and also think about the problem of salinization of aquifers, for example, due to the incoming rise of relative sea level. So I think that for us, global warming is not nice. I can speak specifically, I can talk specifically for what concerns the problem of loss of territory and the flooding of our coastal areas. Because I'm interested specifically in this point, how delta and coastal area responds to change in relative sea level and change in climate conditions. Thank you, Kim. Also think about this last thing, we are late. Think about another aspect of the climate change, of the global warming that we didn't discuss. The higher frequency and intensity of climate extremes, storms, or heavy rainfalls. All this kind of climate extremes events seems to be more frequent and more intense since the second part of the last century. And all this kind of climate extreme events can be very dangerous for the territory. Think about, for what concerns storms, the erosion of the coastline and the inundation of inland portion behind the shoreline. Think about, for what concerns rainfall, heavy rainfall. One of the consequences of this heavy rainfall are slides, for example. So we have so flooding over the plain, but also skies. So it's very complex, and we have a lot of consequences when climate change. I think that it's time to say goodbye. Thank you for your attention. I think that we can hand that's it, our meeting.